The sound did not belong to the wind. I had been walking the east road for an hour, cutting the last of the season's yarrow before frost took it entirely. My fingers were numb inside my gloves. The sky had gone the color of a bruise, that particular gray-violet that means you have 20 minutes before real dark settles in and the cold stops being uncomfortable and starts being dangerous. I heard it between one step and the next. Thin, wet, alive. I stopped. It came again. Not an animal, not the creak of a branch. Something that pulled at a place beneath the ribs where reason does not live. I left the path. She was in the ditch beside a fallen oak, half covered by her own cloak, curled around a bundle the way a body curls around the last warm thing it has. I knelt in the frozen mud and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was there, barely, a flutter, a candle in a doorway. Her lips were the color of slate. Her fingers were locked around the bundle so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Her eyes opened. They found my face. Whatever she saw there was enough. She pushed the bundle toward me with the last organized movement her body had left. Her mouth opened. One word formed, soundless at first, then barely audible. Please. I took the child. Her hands fell open. I pressed my fingers back to her wrist and felt the pulse complete one more beat, then half of one, then nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no sound from the road, just the cold and the dark coming in, and a living child in my arms. The blanket was fine wool, dark blue, almost black. In the fading light, I could make out something stitched at the corner, a crest, angular, unfamiliar. I did not look at it long. The child was warm against my chest, warmer than it should have been given the temperature, and it was watching me with eyes too steady for an infant's eyes. My hands were shaking. I noticed it the way I notice things, clinically, from a slight distance. My hands do not shake. I have held a man's leg still while a surgeon worked. I have ground belladonna at midnight without spilling a grain. My hands do not shake. I adjusted the blanket, folded the edge under, smoothed the wool across the child's shoulder, precise, deliberate, the way I align dried bundles on their hooks. Each movement, its own small act of order. The shaking slowed. The child made a sound, low and contented, and pressed its face into my collar. I stood up. I left the woman in the ditch because there was nothing else to do for her and everything still to do for the child. I walked back to the road. I walked toward the village lights. Father Aldrich was in the square when I arrived. He is always in the square when something is wrong, as though he senses disruption the way a dog senses weather. He was speaking to 2 men near the well when he saw me come through the outer lane, and he stopped mid-sentence. The crowd gathered the way crowds do, not all at once, but steadily, drawn by the particular quality of Aldrich's stillness. He has a voice that fills a room without effort, without volume, the kind of voice that was built for pronouncements. I told him plainly. A woman on the East Road, dying, a child that needed warmth and milk. I had brought it here because here was where warmth and milk existed. He looked at the child, then he looked at the blanket. He took one corner between his fingers and held it toward the nearest torch. The crest caught the light. His face changed, not with fear exactly, but with the particular expression of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected and finds no satisfaction in being right. "This mark," he said. The square had gone quiet. This is the mark of Vale. I heard the murmur move through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. The name meant something to them. It meant nothing to me then. I was still holding a child who needed feeding. Aldrich looked at me. His Bible was in his left hand, held at his side like a man who has not decided yet whether he needs it as comfort or as weight. You brought a vampire's offspring into this village. I brought a child who was freezing. It is not a child. His voice did not rise. That was the worst part. It never rose. It is a creature. The vampire king's blood does not produce children. It produces heirs to something we want no part of. Take it back to the road where you found it. I did not move. The cold was significant. My feet had gone numb inside my boots. The child was still warm against my chest, impossibly warm, and it had not cried once since I found it. I looked for Marin. She was there, 3 rows back, near the farrier's wall. We had known each other since we were girls. She had sat with me through my mother's illness. I had made her wedding tinctures and held her hand through 2 difficult winters. I found her face in the crowd, and I waited. 1 second. 2, 3. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her eyes were on the ground. She did not look up. Aldrich spoke again. Anyone who shelters this woman shelters the creature. She is no longer part of this village. The crowd moved. Not violently. That would have been easier to bear. They simply stepped aside. A path opened between me and the gate, clean and deliberate, as though they had rehearsed it. Torchlight on either side. Faces I had known for years, turned slightly away. The way people turn from something they have decided not to see. My knees nearly went. I felt it. The specific failure of the body when the mind has absorbed more than it can process. My left knee buckled, just slightly, just once. I caught myself by pressing my free hand flat against my thigh, hard, the way I press a shaking scale to stop it swinging. The pressure steadied me. I breathed through my nose. I adjusted the child's weight against my shoulder. I walked. The child made a small sound against my neck. Not distress. Something quieter than that. I walked through the gate. The bar dropped into place behind me. That sound. Wood on iron. Final. Definitive. I will carry it for the rest of my life. Not because it was loud. Because of what it was not. It was not shouting. It was not cruelty performed for an audience. It was simply a gate being closed, a practical action, the village securing itself for the night. I stood on the winter road. Behind me, torchlight and voices, already fading, already returning to the ordinary business of an evening. Ahead, darkness and cold, and a road I had walked 100 times, that now led nowhere I had ever been. The child's face was pressed into my collar. Its breath was warm. Its fingers had found the edge of my coat and were holding on with a grip that had no business existing in something this small. I shifted it to my other arm, adjusted the blanket, checked the wrapping at its feet where the cold would come in first. Precise movements, herbalist hands doing what they know when the rest of the world has stopped making sense. In my pockets, yarrow, dried, a folded paper of chamomile, a small knife for cutting, 40 yards of winter road and no destination. In my arms, a child wrapped in a blanket bearing a crest that had just cost me everything. I started walking. The road gave me 2 hours before it gave me anything useful. I walked with my head down and the child pressed against my chest, one hand flat against its back, feeling the rise and fall of its breathing, the way I check a patient's pulse. Not for comfort, but for information. Still breathing, still warm, still here. The cold was serious now, the kind that gets into the joints and stays. My feet had stopped reporting sensations somewhere around the first mile. I kept walking because stopping was the only thing worse than moving. The settlement was not much. A scatter of buildings at the wood's edge, gas lamps burning low along a single unpaved lane, a market square that had packed up for the evening but left its smell behind. Preserved meat, tallow, wet straw. Half the structures looked borrowed from better years. One of them, at the far edge where the lane dissolved into tree line, was a cottage with a caved-in corner and a door that had warped off its upper hinge. Empty. Dark. Out of the wind. I went in. The floor was stone, which was honest at least. The hearth had been used within the last year. I could tell by the ash, the way it had compacted rather than scattered. Someone had left a small stack of birch bark beside it, dry enough to catch. I had my knife. I had flint in my coat pocket because I am a woman who lives alone and I have always carried flint. I had the child, who watched me work the fire with those unnervingly steady eyes and made no sound while I coaxed the first flame out of the bark. When the fire took, I sat back on my heels and looked at the room. Cracked plaster. A single window with intact glass, which was more than I had expected. A hook on the wall near the hearth where someone had once hung something. A pot. A coat. A life. I stood up and hung my herb bag on it. Yarrow on the left, chamomile on the right. The small knife on the hook's edge, blade inward. The child made a sound. I turned. It was watching the fire with an expression that had no business on an infant's face, focused, almost evaluating, the way a person looks at something they are deciding whether to trust. "I know," I said. "It's not much." It looked at me, then back at the fire. I needed milk. That was the immediate problem, the one that would become a crisis by morning if I didn't solve it. I had nothing to feed it. My coat could keep it warm. The fire could keep us both from freezing. But the child needed feeding, and I had no means and no connections in a settlement I had never visited, and no reason for anyone here to help me. I went back out into the cold. The market square was mostly dark, but one stall had a lamp still burning. A broad planked table stacked with waxed wheels of hard cheese, jars of preserved plum, bundles of dried sausage hung on a crossbar, like a strange harvest. The woman behind it was packing the last of her stock into a wooden crate, moving with the efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and stopped finding it interesting around repetition 400. She looked up when I approached. Broad hands. A face that had decided somewhere in its 40s to stop apologizing for itself. She looked at me, then at the child, then at my face in that order, and something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. "You look like you've walked through something unpleasant," she said. "I have." "The child yours?" I considered the question. "Yes," I said, because it was the truest answer I had. She looked at the child again. The child looked back at her with those steady, ancient eyes. The woman, Petra, I would learn, Petra, who had been trading at this settlement for 20 years and had seen most varieties of human difficulty, did not flinch. "What do you need?" "Milk," I said. "Warmed slow. I have nothing to pay you with tonight, but I have skills and I will—" "Goat milk," she said, already moving toward the back of the stall. "Warmed slow. I have a nanny goat who lost her kid last week. Take what you need." She reappeared with a clay jar, still faintly warm from the animal's body. She held it out. My hands shook, accepting it. I felt it happen and could not stop it. The specific tremor that comes not from cold, but from the body finally acknowledging what the mind has been refusing to process. 2 hours of walking. A gate dropping behind me. Marin's eyes on the ground. My hands, which do not shake, shaking. Petra watched this without comment. She did not look away, which was its own kind of mercy. "The cottage at the wood's edge," I said, steadying my grip on the jar. "Is it spoken for?" "Hasn't been spoken for in 3 years." She picked up her crate. "Don't let the door fall on you. Lift it as you close it. The hinge is gone." I walked back through the dark with the jar warm between my palms. The child drank. I fed it slowly, the way you do when you don't know the last time it ate. Small amounts, pauses, watching for distress. There was none. It drank with focused, methodical intent, both hands wrapped around my fingers, grip extraordinary for something this small. When it was done, it looked up at me with an expression I could not name, and then closed its eyes and slept. I sat on the stone floor of the cottage with my back against the hearth wall and the sleeping child against my chest, and I allowed myself, for the first time since the East Road, to breathe. The fire had burned down to coals. The room was dim and orange and quiet. I should have felt afraid. I should have felt the full weight of what had happened. The expulsion, the gate, the road, the nothing that waited on the other side of this night. Instead, I noticed the child. The fire had gone low enough that the room was more shadow than light. Any infant should have stirred, should have fussed at the change, the cooling air, the dark pressing in at the window. This one did not. Its breathing stayed even. Its face stayed still. And then, in the deep quiet, it turned its head toward the window. The glass was black with night. Nothing beyond it but tree line and dark. The child's eyes opened. It looked at the window with that focused, evaluating expression, the same one it had turned on the fire. And then, slowly, it raised one hand toward the glass. Reaching. I pulled it gently back against my chest. It did not resist, but it kept its eyes on the window until sleep took it again. I did not sleep for a long time after that. Days passed. Then more days. I learned the cottage the way I learn anything, through my hands. Which floorboards held weight and which did not. Where the draft came in at the window frame and how to pack it with dried moss. The hearth drew well if you kept the damper 3/4 open. The hook near the door was iron, old, set deep. It held the weight of my full herb line without complaint. I dried yarrow and chamomile and the last of my meadow, sweet along that line, spacing them precisely, each bundle separated by 2 finger widths, stems aligned. The cottage began to smell like my workroom. That helped more than I expected. Petra came every second day. She brought goat milk and hard cheese and commentary delivered in the flat tone of someone who has decided that warmth is more useful than sentiment. "You're putting color back in your face," she said one morning, setting a jar on the table without ceremony. "Cottage still standing, child still breathing. You're doing better than most people do with less." "I found a rabbit on the doorstep this morning," I said. She looked at me. "On the flat stone, dressed already, clean cut at the joints." I had been turning it over in my mind since dawn. "No tracks in the snow around it." Petra was quiet for a moment. "And 2 days ago?" "Firewood, against the east wall. Enough for a week." She set down the second jar she'd been holding. "Someone is looking after you," she said. "Or looking at you." A pause. "Either way, eat the rabbit." I ate the rabbit. But that night I lay awake and listened to the silence outside the cottage walls. And the silence had a quality I could not name. Not empty, but occupied. The way a room feels different when someone is standing just outside the door. The child slept through it. Peacefully. Deeply. In the morning I straightened every bundle on the drying line. Aligned them by type. Pressed my fingertips against the stems until the tremor in my hands slowed and stopped. Petra's stall was busy on market day. Farmers and traders and a woman selling live chickens from a slatted crate who argued with everyone in earshot. I had the child in the crook of my left arm, a jar of Petra's preserved plum in my right hand, and I was mid-transaction when it happened. The child went rigid. Not distress, not the arching, red-faced rigidity of a crying infant. Something else. Every muscle in its small body went taut and purposeful, and both arms extended, hands open, straining towards something behind me. I turned. The crowd had shifted. Not parted, exactly. More like water moving around a stone, people adjusting their paths without quite knowing why. At the edge of the square, 30 paces back, a figure stood at the entrance to a narrow alley between two buildings. Tall, black coat, tailored, not a working man's coat. The coat of someone who has never needed to work. Still in the way that most people are not still. The way a thing is still when it has chosen stillness rather than arrived at it by accident. His face was turned toward me. Amber eyes. I know what I see. I have catalogued the world through observation since I was old enough to hold a lens. I know the color amber. I have dried enough calendula to know every shade of it. These were amber, and they were fixed on me with an attention so complete and so still that the 30 paces between us felt like nothing at all. The cold hit me a half-second later. Not winter cold. I know winter cold. I had been living in it for weeks. This was specific, concentrated. It came from his direction, like standing downwind of an open icehouse, a cold with intention behind it, and it touched my face and my hands and the back of my throat when I breathed. The child made a sound I had never heard before. Not crying, not the contented sounds it made when fed or warm. Something between recognition and demand, a sound that said, "I know you," and "come here," in the same breath, in a register that bypassed language entirely and went straight to the place beneath the ribs where reason does not live. The figure did not move, did not blink. The amber eyes held mine and I could not look away, could not make myself look away, and the cold pressed against my face and the child strained toward him with both hands open, and the square went on around us. Chickens arguing, coins changing hands, Petra's voice somewhere behind me. All of it distant. All of it happening in a different world than the one that existed between me and those 30 paces of cobblestone. Then he turned. He walked into the alley. No sound of footsteps. No sound at all. The shadows at the alley's entrance seemed to lean toward him as he passed, pulled by something I had no name for. And then he was gone and the cold began, slowly, to release its grip on the air. Petra's hand landed on my elbow. "Who was that?" I opened my mouth, closed it. The child was still reaching toward the empty alley, both hands extended, fingers spread, straining toward a space that now held nothing but shadow and the faint, fading cold. "I don't know," I said, but my hands were shaking again. The deep, uncontrollable tremor, that comes from the body, knowing something the mind has not yet caught up to. I pressed them flat against the edge of Petra's market table, palms down, hard, and held them there until the wood's solidity traveled up through my wrists and steadied me. The child was still reaching. The alley was still empty. And the vampire king, because I knew, in the wordless place beneath the ribs, exactly what I had just seen, was gone into the dark between buildings as though he had never been there at all. Father Aldrich stepped into the light. He came around the corner of the cottage with the particular bearing of a man who has never once arrived anywhere without expecting to be received. Chin level, Bible in his left hand, the other hand slightly raised as though already preparing to gesture toward Scripture. Renard's 2 soldiers flanked him, not escorting him so much as containing him, the way you contain something that does not yet know it needs containing. He saw Renard on one knee. He saw the child in my arms. He saw the doorway, the sentence he had been building. I could see it in his face, the architecture of it, the measured cadence already assembled and ready, collapsed, fell apart word by word, from the end backward, until there was nothing left but his mouth, open, and the cold. The cold was extraordinary now. It pressed against every surface. My breath came in white plumes. The frost on the window glass had thickened into something that looked almost deliberate, almost patterned, the way ice forms when it had direction. Emmerich stepped out of the doorway. He did not rush. He did not need to. He moved with the particular economy of something that has never once needed to hurry, that has 2 centuries of patience behind every step, and the shadows moved with him. Not dramatically, not like a performance, but the way a coat moves with the body wearing it, naturally, inevitably, because they belonged to him and went where he went. He stopped 6 feet from Father Aldrich. The torchlight from Renard's lantern caught his face. His eyes were fully crimson. Not the warm amber of the market square, not the burning shift I had watched in my doorway. This was complete, total, the color of old garnets held to a flame, and they were fixed on the village elder with an attention so absolute and so still that the air between them seemed to compress. Father Aldrich's Bible came up. His hand shook. The knuckles went white around the spine of it, white and then whiter. The grip of a man whose body has understood something his mind is still refusing. He pressed the cover toward Emmerich like a shield, like a wall, like the thing that had always been sufficient and was discovering in real time that it was not. In the name of, no! One word. Emmerich's voice. Low, precise, unhurried. The voice of a man who has not raised it in 2 centuries because he has never needed to. It landed in the cold air and stayed there, and Father Aldrich's sentence stopped as though it had struck a wall. The Bible trembled in his grip. Emmerich looked at it, then at the man holding it. His expression was not rage. Rage would have been easier to witness. It was something colder and more complete than rage. It was the expression of a thing that has been patient for a very long time and has now decided that patience is finished. You put a woman and an infant on a winter road, he said, and called it doctrine. Father Aldrich's mouth opened, closed. The measured cadence tried to reassemble itself. I could see it happening. The familiar architecture reaching for its scaffolding, the scripture already forming behind his eyes. The creature, her name, Emmerich said, is Flori. The name fell into the silence like a stone into still water, and the ripples it made were not sound, but temperature. The cold dropped another degree, sharp and sudden, and Father Aldrich's breath came out in a white plume that scattered and was gone. She was 3 weeks old, Emmerich continued, on a winter road, in the dark. Each sentence its own complete thing, delivered without inflection, without volume, which made them worse. Because you required it. The village. Something moved in his face. Not the fracture I had watched in my doorway. That had been grief, private, earned. This was different. This was the controlled thing deciding, precisely and finally, what it was going to do. I know every name in that village. I know every face. I have known them for longer than their grandparents have been alive. A pause. I have never touched them. He let that land. Father Aldrich's hand, the one holding the Bible, was shaking so badly now that the pages rustled. Not from cold. The cold was mine to feel, mine and Renard's and the soldiers. Whatever Father Aldrich was feeling, it was not cold. You put my daughter on a road to die, Emmerich said, and you did not even know whose child you were casting out. She is unnatural. She is alive. The first time his voice had changed. Not louder, deeper. The word came from somewhere below language, below doctrine, below the 2 centuries of careful stillness, and it hit Father Aldrich in the chest. I saw it happen. Saw the man actually step back, 1 foot sliding on the frozen ground. She is alive because this woman. His eyes moved to me briefly, and the crimson held something in it that I could not name and did not look at directly. Chose her, on a road, in the dark, with nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no sound from the settlement. Renard's lantern was the only light, and it cast long shadows that leaned toward Emmerich and away from everything else, as though the dark itself had chosen a side. Father Aldrich looked at me. For the first time since the village square, he looked directly at me. His face was gray. The Bible had lowered to his side, not deliberately. His arm had simply run out of the strength required to hold it up. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has decided is not real and has just discovered is standing in front of him. I looked back. I was holding his daughter. I was standing in a patched dress with herb-stained fingers and frost in my hair, and I had nothing. No doctrine, no authority, no weight of institution behind me. I had a child who had pressed her face into my collar on a winter road and held on with a grip that had no business existing in something that small. I did not speak. I did not need to. Renard stood. He rose from his knee with the deliberate movement of a man reassembling his professional composure. And when he was upright, he turned to Father Aldrich with the expression of someone who has been a soldier long enough to know exactly what an order looks like and what it costs to give one. Father Aldrich of the village of Crest. His voice was level, clipped, the voice of a man reading a charge, not performing one. By the authority of the House of Vale, you are charged with the abandonment and willful endangerment of a ward of the crown. He paused. You will come with us. Father Aldrich's mouth opened. I acted within my... You will come with us, Renard said again, in exactly the same tone, and the 2 soldiers moved. They were not rough. They did not need to be rough. They simply took position on either side of him, and the Bible slipped from his grip. Not thrown, not dropped in defiance, just released. The fingers opening the way fingers open when the body has stopped receiving instructions from a mind that has gone somewhere else entirely. It hit the frozen ground with a flat, unremarkable sound. Father Aldrich looked down at it. His face in the lantern light was the face of a man who has built his entire architecture on the certainty that he was right, and who is standing in the rubble of that certainty with no tools for what comes next. The composure was gone. The measured cadence was gone. What remained was just a man, old and gray and cold, looking at a book on the ground. I did not feel triumph. I had expected to feel triumph. I had imagined, in the long nights in the cottage, what it would feel like when the accounting came. The gate, the road, the crowd stepping aside, Marin's eyes on the ground. I had imagined something clean and hot and satisfying. What I felt instead was tired. Deeply, specifically tired, the way you feel at the end of a long illness when the fever finally breaks. Not well, not restored, but emptied of the thing that had been burning through you, and aware for the first time of how much it had cost. The soldiers walked Father Aldrich away from the cottage, around the corner, into the dark. His footsteps faded. The cold did not lift immediately. It held for a moment. Emmerich's cold, the intentional kind, the kind with edges, and then, slowly, it began to release. Degree by degree. The frost on the window glass stopped thickening. The shadows drew back from the door. The candle inside the cottage, which had gone out, somehow caught again. A small, steady flame, burning in the dark interior as though it had never stopped. Emmerich turned to me. His eyes had shifted. Not fully amber, something between, the crimson cooling at the edges, the amber reasserting itself, the two colors moving through each other the way light moves through water. He looked at Florrie, asleep against my shoulder. Her face turned into my neck, her fingers locked around the collar of my coat. He looked at her a long time. Then he looked at me. "You named her," he said. "She needed something to be called. Florrie." He said it again the way he had said it in the doorway. Stripped of control, soft. The word doing something to his face that 2 centuries of careful stillness had not prepared it for. "Her mother—" He stopped, began again. "Her mother said, if it was a girl, she wanted something that meant the last of the season, something that survived the frost." My throat closed. I pressed my lips together and held them there, and breathed through my nose and did not make a sound. "You chose correctly," he said. The words were simple. They were the most inadequate words for what they were trying to carry, and he knew it. I could see him know it. Could see the 2 centuries of precision and control reaching for language and finding it insufficient. His jaw tightened. His hands, at his sides, were still. "I cannot," he stopped. "There is no accounting for what you have done. There is no—" Another stop. The Vampire King, standing in the frost outside a patched cottage at the edge of a wood, running out of words. "I know," I said. He looked at me. "I know there isn't," I said. "I didn't do it for accounting." The silence between us was different from all the other silences of that night. Not the silence of the cold, not the silence of the crowd stepping aside, not the silence after a gate drops. This was the silence of 2 people standing in the same space and understanding, without language, that the space has changed. Florrie stirred. She lifted her head from my shoulder, slowly, the way she does when she is deciding whether to wake, and turned toward Emmerich. Her eyes opened. They found his face in the dark, those steady, ancient eyes, and she looked at him with the focused, evaluating expression I had watched her turn on the fire, on the window, on the empty alley in the market square. Then she reached for him. Both hands. Fingers spread. The same reaching she had done toward the window in the dark, toward the alley, toward every shadow that had been him without my knowing it. The same reach, but different now. Not straining, not desperate. Certain. The reach of something that has found what it was looking for and is simply, finally, closing the distance. His hands came up. They were shaking. The same tremor I had watched in the doorway. The fists unclenching, the hands rising, the trembling that was not cold and was not fear. But this time they did not stop. This time they came all the way up, and I placed Flory into them, and his arms closed around her. He held his daughter. He held her the way I had held her on the road. Both hands, one beneath, one at her back. The grip of someone who understands that the most important thing in the world is currently in their arms and requires precision, requires care, requires the full attention of every faculty they possess. He held her, and she pressed her face into his coat and made the contented sound, the low one, the one that meant here, this, yes. And the vampire king stood in the frost outside a patched cottage and held his daughter alive and breathing, and the expression on his face was not something I should have been allowed to witness. I looked away. I looked at the cottage door, at the candle burning inside, at the drying line visible through the window. Yarrow on the left, chamomile on the right. Each bundle separated by 2 finger widths, stems aligned. I had built something here. From nothing. From a winter road and 40 yards of dark and a child who needed feeding. I had built a life small and precise and mine in the space that expulsion had made. Renard appeared at my elbow. He held something out, a folded paper, sealed with wax the color of old garnets. "The House of Vale," he said quietly, "does not forget its debts." I looked at the seal, the V intertwined with thorns. "I don't need tapto." "It is not payment," he said. "It is an offer." He paused. "There is a position in the estate's household. Herbalist, physician's assistant, whatever title you prefer. Your own rooms, your own workroom." Another pause, and his voice dropped further. "She will need someone who knows her, who she knows." I looked at Flory, held against Emmerich's chest, her face turned toward mine over his shoulder. Her eyes were open, watching me with those steady, ancient eyes, watching me the way she had watched the fire, deciding whether to trust. My hands were still. For the first time since the East Road, since the ditch, since the gate, since the tremor that had moved through me in Petra's market stall, my hands were completely, entirely still. No pressing them flat against tables, no deliberate pressure against wood or stone, just still, at my sides, in the cold air, in the dark. I took the paper. Petra was at her stall when I came to say goodbye. She looked at me, at the sealed paper in my hand, at the absence of the child against my shoulder. Her broad face did not change. It recalibrated, the way it had the first night, reading the information and adjusting. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and produced a clay jar, goat milk, still warm, the same as the first night. For the road, she said. My eyes burned. I blinked hard. I took the jar with both hands and held it the way I had held the first one, the warmth traveling up through my palms, steadying me, the specific comfort of something real and warm and given without condition. Petra. Don't, she said, not unkindly. I know what you're going to say, and it will take too long, and I have a market to run. I laughed. It came out rough and unexpected, the laugh of someone who has not laughed in weeks and has forgotten what it feels like. Petra's mouth curved. Not a smile exactly, but the expression of someone who has decided that warmth is more useful than sentiment and is offering it anyway. I set the jar on her counter. I pressed both my hands flat against the worn wood of her market table, one last time, deliberate, a gesture she would not understand and did not need to. The wood pushed back, solid and real, and I felt it travel up through my wrists and into my chest. Then I picked up the jar, and I walked toward the road. The estate above the Vile Valley was visible from the road when the weather was clear. I had seen it once, years ago, from a distance. Iron gates, black stone, a family name carved above the arch. I had looked at it the way you look at things that are not meant for you. I walked toward it now with a clay jar of goat milk in my hands, and herb-stained fingers and frost in my hair. And the gates, when Renard's soldiers opened them, were exactly as I remembered. The V above the arch. The thorns. Inside, in the entrance hall, Florrie was in Emmerich's arms. She heard me before she saw me. I know this because her head came up a half-second before I came through the door, the same way she had always turned toward the window before I heard anything outside it. Her eyes found me across the hall. She reached. Both hands. Fingers spread. Certain. I crossed the hall and took her, and she pressed her face into my neck and made the contented sound, and her fingers locked around my collar with the grip that had no business existing in something this small. I held her. Emmerich watched from across the hall. His eyes were amber, fully, quietly amber, the color of calendula held to morning light. Something in them that had been held at distance for a very long time. "Welcome," he said, "to Vale." I adjusted Florrie's weight against my shoulder. I smoothed the blanket across her back. Precise, deliberate. Each movement its own small act of order. My hands were still. They had called it doctrine. They had called it protection. But doctrine does not press its face into your collar on a winter road and hold on. Choice does. If this story moved you, if you believe that compassion is the most defiant act, subscribe for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, when did you last choose someone the world told you not to?